Well, you mentioned the word doc so many times, I feel I ought to mention why. I was not a medic. That's typically why somebody gets called doc in the service. But I was not anything but a medic. I had a very different agenda than medics do while I was in the service. I teach courses for veterans that are coming back from overseas these past 6, 7, 8 years now. And I have a PhD, so for a lot of students I'm Dr. Martin. But I think for the veterans it's more appropriate to think that I'm more along the lines of a medic than an academic, because like the medic in a combat unit, I'm on the same mission with you. I've got a slightly different agenda. And so, like the veterans in my class, I'm on an ongoing mission or process of returning home or finding my way, but I have a slightly different agenda or path to follow. I asked Brian, I said, Brian, what do you want me to say? And he said, just talk about your service. Usually I'm given a specific topic to talk about, and that's a lot easier. I actually arrived in Vietnam as part of what was called the Army of the Pacific. That was very, I thought it was very stirring. And I arrived on Veterans Day. As far as a branch of service, I've served in light weapons infantry, mechanized infantry, armored cavalry, and special forces. Then I had a 10-year break in service. I was too old to go back and do high-speed stuff again, so they sent me to the Transportation Corps. Nowadays, I guess it'd be called the Combat Transportation Corps, but we actually weren't in combat, so. Anyway, in my classes for veterans, their first assignment is entitled, so what's your story? Well, here's my story. I never wanted to be a veteran. As a kid, I fantasized about being a soldier. When I was little, very little, I asked my dad if he'd ever killed anybody in the war. And I was pretty serious about that. I was about 5 years old, but, and the easy answer, he said, oh yeah, hundreds. I mowed down hundreds of them with a machine gun. Oh, I was 5 years old. I had images of what that was like. I saw enough movies about the Korean War, so I thought, yeah, that's my old man, A few years later, I'm snooping around the house, as an only child would, when the parents are gone, and I came across my father's military records. Turns out he'd entered the service after World War II was over, and he was a clerk typist. Okay. All right, well, there's many, many kinds of veterans, many ways of serving your country, right? I had the usual boyhood fantasies about what my war might be like someday. I watched all the movies, especially the documentaries Victory at Sea and The Big Picture. I loved The Big Picture. Anyway, because it showed actual Army training and, at that time rather than going back to the war. I had the little green Army men. I played with my friends. I was always the German. I always knew I was going to get shot at the end. I always knew how every one of our Army games would end. Right? My boyhood dreams of someday being a soldier gave way to an interest in girls and going out in the world. And so after high school, I spent a couple years traveling around the world, literally. And when I returned, the absolutely dead last thing in the world that I'd ever want to do is join the Army. However, we are not in control of ourselves sometimes. I was drafted out of college. I didn't like boot camp or basic training, but it never occurred to me I wouldn't do well there. There was one guy in my platoon, though, Private Fowler. He always looked angry and bitter and just like he'd just eaten something really bad. And so one day in formation, I asked him, I said, Fowler, why do you always look like this? And he very calmly, very coldly said, I'm worried that all this is going to change me. And until that moment, it had never occurred to me that the Army would change me. I was under this delusion that if anything, there might be a shot that I'd change the Army a little bit, okay? But, yeah, they're not going to change me. Yeah, give me a break, As a draftee, you don't know what they're going to do with you. Since I typed about well over 100 words a minute at that time, I spoke German. I assumed the Army, a very smart, intelligent, long-time organization, that they would do what they had done with my father, send me to Germany as a clerk typist. As it turned out, they decided to send me as an infantryman to Vietnam. I've often felt that right around that time, a fluent Vietnamese-speaking American who was an arms dealer or arms trader, that he got sent to that job in Heidelberg that I should have gotten. And I was out there downrange where he should have been. But the Army doesn't run unlocked. Now, our drill sergeants were pretty mean to us. I know they've had to soften up. With the volunteer Army, you got to be nice to people because they asked to be there. So you kind of got to lighten up a little bit. But our drill sergeants, they could punctuate their commands with a punch or a kick. You never heard anything except a shout at you or their laughter at you because you'd made a mistake or they had played a trick on you. Well, one day, me and the others who'd gotten orders for the infantry were taken aside by our drill sergeant in one of the barracks, and he now addressed us in the kindest, most gentle terms. He was not just respectful, but he was patient, and he was pitying toward us. Well, you can imagine, as a new soldier, month in the service, all you ever done is seen this really harsh side of these guys. For one of these guys to be that way toward you, that was really unnerving. And it occurred to me that I must be going to hell. And that was about right. I ended up in Vietnam as assigned to the 14th Infantry Regiment along the Cambodian border. Now, it's a common expression, it's a cliche, a truism, whatever, that in combat everybody is afraid. Everybody's afraid, right? I wasn't afraid. I know what fear is. I know what being afraid is like. I know that because there was one day when I really was afraid. We were being driven in a truck from a field back to a base camp, and the driver was very afraid of being ambushed, and I don't blame him. If I were driving a big 2.5-ton truck down a road in Vietnam, I'd be afraid. But he was incredibly reckless. I wanted to shoot him so bad to put an end to our misery, but I just hung in there. And I know what fear is. I know what it's like to be afraid, that helpless feeling and dread. The first time that I was, the first time I'd actually been fired on, I was able to see the rounds coming at me because it was nighttime and they were tracer rounds. They are lit up, these ones you see in movies, and you can't see all the bullets. You can just see the tracer rounds. I could feel and hear them landing in the ground around me. That's how close it was. I mean, I'd never forget the feeling that there was like a crosshair right between my eyes or something at times. And I thought, well, this is the moment of my death. This right now is my last conscious moment of life on this earth. And how did I act? I remembered my training. I applied my training, and I was not afraid. I was resigned. There were many times that I approached what we called booby traps that are now known as IEDs, improvised explosive devices, not to be confused with IUDs. That's a totally different topic that I won't be addressing today. And I remember, yes, thank God. Although I know a thing or two. Anyway, but I remember leaning over, whenever I leaned over these things and would look at them very closely, I would, in my mind, I would say, so this is the last thing I will ever see. This is the last thing my eyes will ever register in my brain. Why was I so cool? And I don't mean cool like Jimmy Dean cool or something, or Brad Pitt, or I was cold. I felt I was already a dead man. That death in Vietnam was my destiny. Of the 9 men in the original squad I was assigned to, I was the only one left at the end of a month. So I was totally convinced I had no future. There was only a present, and if that's all I had, I was going to fight like nobody's business, like the best I possibly could. I had the anger and the bitter hatred of a young man whose dreams were snuffed out and whose life would soon be too. I was mean, I was brutal. I appreciated that I was unraveling as the kind of person that I had been, and was unfolding someone who was ruthless, despicable, cold-hearted. I could go on. Private Fowler, you were right. I was changed. And the only way I could tolerate these changes in me was because I believed that this sick bastard that I'd become was soon going to be shot, blown up, and be gone forever. And so that made it tolerable. So I wasn't brave. I was fearless. I volunteered for everything. I gave up my R&R. It's called rest and recreational, 1-week vacation they give you, because it meant missing a big attack. And I didn't want to miss that. I gave up a safe assignment in a base camp because I couldn't leave my platoon. Did I see myself as a hero? Did others see me as a hero? No, I was just doing what I felt an excellent soldier would do. Those around me, I think, just thought I was fucking crazy. Okay, to be honest with you. I know I should have censored that, but I was crazy. Okay. I hated the Army. I hated the Army officers. I hated the career soldiers, and they all hated me. But boy, could they use me. They really put me to work. Imagine my complete disbelief when I finished up my tour and I was never wounded. I was in shock. I was fully ready to die. I was totally unprepared to live. As a boy, I remembered this scene in the Victory at Sea series where the men are coming home from the war. And I always cried. I'd never witnessed scenes with more joy and more happiness than when they showed these men coming back and their families there to meet them. But when I met my wife and she started to embrace me, I made it real clear. I'm not somebody you touch, and I'm not somebody who's going to touch you. You just keep your distance. It wasn't like the movies. It wasn't like the documentary. 6 days after I left Vietnam, I started class, full-time student, Cal Poly Pomona. The first time I tried to speak about having been at war in the service, my vocal cords seized. I could move my tongue and lips, but it'd be as if there were no power amplification here today. I quickly learned not to talk about the war, not to deny that I'd ever been in the service, and I invented a good reason why I was what used to be called 4F. Before I went into the Army, strangers were drawn to me. They'd come up and smile and greet me. It would be decades before that happened again. It'd be decades before I stopped carrying a gun 24/7, wherever I went. After I was out for a while, I joined the National Guard because I figured I'd fit into society a little better there. Turns out everybody in the National Guard had joined to avoid fighting in Vietnam. So I was definitely the odd man out. They thought, no, you're supposed, you don't come here after you've been in Vietnam. You come here so you'll never be in Vietnam. So I was an army of one. That was me. So I didn't get blown up or shot at. You know how we have Memorial Day for those who lost their lives? We've got Veterans Day like today for those who came back. I often think there maybe ought to be a third day for those whose bodies came back, but the spirit did not. That really great guy that I thought I was, he never survived Vietnam. And for years I didn't like the guy that came back in his place. I hated that guy. I used to fly an MIA missing in action flag from my house, but it flew for me. I was the MIA. And over the years, I searched for his remains and occasionally find bits and pieces. Well, you can pinpoint on a manifest when a person returns, but that's the physical return. The emotional, mental, spiritual parts take a lot longer, if ever, to make it back. Now, as I've said these things, and as I wrote them down, it occurred to me that this is pretty grim stuff. This is a downer. Sheesh. I mean, my God. It sounds more like a suicide note than a speech. And here we are trying to glorify those that serve. So I want to end on a more upbeat note. God damn it, we're Americans, right? We turn our frowns upside down, okay? All right, well, after a long break in service, I joined the Army Reserve, so I'd finish out my 20 good years and get some kind of retirement. And even though I'd been an officer and had all these years, I had to go through regular recruit processing down at what's called MEPS there. I had a PhD. I did really good on the testing part. But I had to meet the physical standard, the weight standard, the PT test and everything. and I worked really hard to get in shape. And then I found out that over the years I'd actually lost an inch or two from my height, so I still wasn't light enough. So I had to go back and lose some more weight. Yeah, but then I finally met the standard, and I got to do all these, and it was kind of rough at first. I was the only guy without tattoos or designer underwear, so again, feeling kind of like the odd man out. But I got with the program. They gave me a beret, made me feel very French, I've worn that in France. It's cool. And they gave me a new Kevlar helmet. It reminded me of my German origins. Dug that. I learned to say "Ugh" at inappropriate occasions, kind of like made me feel like I had Tourette's syndrome or something. And then along comes 2003, and 6 weeks before I'm supposed to be discharged, I get activated, and I'm told that I've been extended until 2031. Well, I thought, you mean, they got the numbers wrong. You mean 2013, not 31. Because 10 years, that's bad enough, The guy said, no, there's no mistake. You're in for another 28 years. And I said, I don't understand how you can be so calm about all this, so matter of fact. And he says, well, why? Or maybe, I don't know if he said it quite like that. And I said, because if this is true, I will end up as the longest serving member of any armed force in the history of the world. I will have had a career spanning 8 decades. I will be a footnote in every military history book that's ever written. I will definitely have my picture in the Guinness Book of Records. I know, I see that coming, okay? And I said, and here you are, you're just standing there like this is no big deal. 2031, yeah, no problem, Anyway, I ended up in my congressman's office. I got a congressional inquiry to prove that this was some kind of mistake. And you guessed it, just like me not going to Germany as a German speaker with a typewriter, there was no mistake. I was extended till the year 2031. I had future visions of myself in my 80s and 90s being dragged across a battlefield on a wire in order to attract enemy fire. I saw myself with a walker with a gun mount on it, kind of something I could swivel around. I saw myself with a bayonet on my cane, and saw myself in a hospital gurney, manning an outpost, ready to use the contents of my colostomy bag as a sort of last-ditch defense weapon against the enemy, right? I'm hardly the first person to say that maybe wars should be fought by old geezers, right? Let the younger ones have their kids, enjoy their lives, have a career, and get the most out of life. And then us old-timers, once our days are starting to be numbered, go out and risk our lives. Go down like Clint Eastwood there in a hail of bullets in a blaze of glory, right? I know the fighting would not last as long, would not be as intense. I think the battles would end in time for the early bird special. Anyway, long story short, 36 hours before I was supposed to fly out, I had a problem with my foot. They sent me home. They said, I'll call you. So I never got to play a part in the search for weapons of mass destruction, and because I'm smart, I think I could have found them. Right? I hope I've achieved one of my goals here today, and that is not to end on an unhappy note. Others have had it far, far worse than me. I'm standing here today. I'm not homeless. I'm not an alcoholic. I've got problems, but they pale. I got to be the kind of officer I wished I'd deserved. I got to be the kind of soldier and have an affection for the Army, which I'd always wanted and didn't have initially. Got 3 great sons, one of whom came back from Iraq safe and sound. A wonderful wife of 35 years. I am a blessed person, far, far better off than I deserve. So, that's my story.